The cold evening wind swept through the streets of Mountain View, making even the most hurried commuters pull their jackets tighter. Sundar Pichai stood quietly at the side of a lonely bus stop, his hands tucked in his coat pockets. His driver had been sent home early because Sundar wanted to walk alone after a long day. He often did this. These walks gave him peace, away from boardrooms, cameras, and the constant noise of decisions that could change millions of lives. Tonight, however, felt different. The air seemed heavier, the clouds hanging low, and the streets unusually empty. As Sundar glanced down the road, his eyes caught something unusual. At the far end of the bus shelter, huddled against the glass, sat a woman. She was wrapped in a thin scarf, her hands tucked under her arms, shivering with every gust of wind. Her shoes looked worn out, her clothes were damp from the earlier rain, and her eyes were downcast, fixed on the ground as if she didn't want to be seen. Most passers-by barely gave her a glance, choosing instead to scroll through their phones or hurry to their cars. Sundar hesitated for a moment, wondering if she might be waiting for someone. But as another gust of cold wind rattled the bus stop, he noticed her lips trembling. Instinctively, he took off his own jacket, a thick, warm, tailored coat, and walked towards her. "You look cold," he said softly, holding out the jacket. She looked up, startled. Her eyes were a striking gray, but there was a mix of exhaustion and something else, something guarded. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, almost as if rejecting kindness was easier than accepting it. "Please," Sundar insisted, draping the jacket over her shoulders before she could protest. "You can give it back later, but right now you need it more than I do." There was a long pause. The woman glanced at him again, as if trying to figure out why a stranger would bother. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice low and cautious. The bus stop clock showed the next bus was still 20 minutes away. Sundar, not wanting to leave her sitting in the cold alone, stayed beside her. "Been a long day?" he asked gently. She gave a half smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You could say that. It's been a long few weeks, actually." She rubbed her hands together under the jacket. "But I don't think you really want to hear about my problems." "You'd be surprised," Sundar replied, his tone warm. "Sometimes talking to a stranger is easier than talking to someone. You know," she tilted her head, studying him for a moment. "You don't look like someone who rides buses often," Sundar chuckled. "Maybe not as often as I should. But sometimes it's the best way to think." The woman hesitated, then sighed. "I was supposed to be in a meeting today, an important one, but things fell apart. I'd been trying to fix something for weeks, and it feels like everything's slipping away." There was a raw honesty in her voice that made Sundar lean in slightly. "What happened?" he asked, his curiosity growing. She looked down at her hands. "It's complicated. And honestly, it's not the kind of thing I share with strangers at bus stops." Then she looked back at him and smiled faintly. "But you've already given me your jacket, so maybe you're not exactly a stranger." Before Sundar could respond, the sound of loud laughter echoed from down the street. 3 men in expensive suits were walking toward the bus stop, their voices sharp and mocking. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, pointed at the woman and said something under his breath that made the other two laugh harder. She immediately stiffened, her face pale. Sundar noticed her grip on the jacket tighten, as if she wanted to disappear into it. The men came closer, and it became clear they knew her. "Well, if it isn't our runaway princess," the tall man said, with a cruel smirk. "What happened? Finally run out of people willing to cover for you?" Sundar stepped slightly in front of her without thinking, his calm gaze meeting theirs. "Is there a problem here?" The tall man looked him up and down, scoffing. "Who are you supposed to be? Her new bodyguard?" "Just someone who doesn't like seeing people treated this way," Sundar replied evenly. The man's smirk widened. "You have no idea who you're defending, do you? Maybe you should ask her why she's standing at a bus stop in the rain, instead of hiding in one of her fancy offices." The woman's face flushed with shame, but she didn't speak. Sundar's instincts told him there was much more to this story than what these men were suggesting. The bus headlights appeared in the distance, cutting through the mist. The men sneered one last time before walking away, their laughter fading. Into the night, Sundar turned back to the woman. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said softly. "But if you want to talk, I'm here." She stared at him for a long moment, as if weighing whether to trust him. Then she whispered, "You have no idea how big of a mess you've just stepped into." And before Sundar could ask what she meant, the bus pulled up. The doors hissed open, and she stepped inside without looking back, taking his jacket with her. But as the bus pulled away, Sundar caught a glimpse of her through the window, pulling out a sleek black leather folder. Embossed on the front in gold letters were the words, World Health Organization. The next morning, Sundar sat at his kitchen table, a steaming cup of chai warming his hands. He tried to focus on the email drafts glowing on his laptop screen, but his mind kept drifting back to the bus stop. He couldn't shake the image of the woman's pale face, the way her fingers clutched his jacket like it was her last shield against the world. And then there was that folder black leather, gold letters spelling out World Health Organization. It wasn't something you saw every day. He wondered who she really was. The men who confronted her last night seemed to know her well enough to taunt her, and their words carried a mix of bitterness and accusation. Yet her reaction hadn't been anger, or shame. It made him wonder if she was running from something, or toward something. Sundar had met countless executives, leaders, and public figures. They usually carried themselves with confidence, even arrogance. But this woman, there was a fragility beneath her guarded demeanor that didn't fit the image of a high-powered CEO. He sipped his chai slowly, thinking about the coincidence of it all. If he hadn't decided to walk home that night, if he hadn't stopped at that bus stop, he would never have met her. Maybe it was just a random encounter. But deep down, Sundar felt a strange pull, as if this meeting wasn't chance at all. His thoughts were interrupted by his phone buzzing against the table. It was a message from his assistant. Urgent update on health tech proposal meeting today at 3 p.m., who CEO expected to attend in person. Sundar froze. World Health Organization. Could it be her? He quickly typed back, asking for the name of the CEO. The reply came a few moments later. Dr. Elena Vargas. He didn't know much about her, only that she had a reputation for being sharp, fearless, and unyielding in negotiations. She had spearheaded major health initiatives across multiple countries, and her decisions had shaped policies that affected millions of lives. But over the last few months, rumors swirled that she'd been under political and corporate pressure. Her bold stances on certain medical reforms had made powerful enemies. Sundar leaned back, exhaling slowly. The woman from the bus stop had never told him her name. But if his gut was right, Dr. Elena Vargas was the same person who had been shivering alone in the cold last night. And if she was, then something was very wrong. A person in her position shouldn't have been stranded without security or a driver, let alone facing open humiliation from men who seemed to know her by the time Sundar walked into the conference room that afternoon. The thought of seeing her again made his heartbeat quicken, not with attraction, but with concern. He wanted answers, and not just for curiosity's sake. He felt like he had stepped into a story that was bigger than he realized. The meeting began with formal introductions, but Dr. Elena Vargas was nowhere to be seen. Representatives from various departments shuffled through their notes, discussing timelines, budgets, and projected outcomes for a joint health tech project between Google and the WHO. Sundar tried to focus, but every time the door opened, his eyes darted toward it. Halfway through the meeting, the door finally swung open. Elena walked in, but she wasn't the shivering woman from last night anymore. She was composed, her hair neatly tied back, wearing a tailored navy suit. The jacket he had given her was gone, replaced by a crisp blazer. Yet her eyes, those gray, sharp, watchful eyes, were the same. And when they met his across the table, there was the briefest flicker of recognition before she masked it behind a professional smile. "Mr. Pichai," she said with a polite nod, "thank you for hosting us today." He returned the nod, keeping his expression neutral. "Doctor, Vargas, welcome. Throughout the meeting, Sundar noticed something unusual. Elena spoke with precision and authority, but she avoided looking directly at him. Every time their eyes met, she quickly glanced away, as if acknowledging their encounter would shatter the image she was projecting to the room. When the meeting adjourned, most attendees gathered their papers and left. Sundar lingered, pretending to review his notes until only Elena remained. Placing her folder carefully into her briefcase, "Dr. Vargas," he began, his tone quiet but firm. "We've met before." "Last night." She froze for half a second, then straightened. "You must be mistaken." "I'm not," he replied calmly. "You were at the bus stop. You were freezing. I gave you my jacket." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. "And if that were true, why bring it up here?" "Because," Sundar said, stepping closer, "I think something's going on. Something you can't talk about in front of others. Those men last night, they knew you, and they weren't being friendly." She glanced toward the door, making sure no one was nearby. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. "Mr. Pichai, you need to forget you saw me, for your own good." His brows furrowed. "Forget? After what I saw, I can't. I don't know what's happening, but it's not just about me." She interrupted, her voice trembling for the first time. "There are things moving right now. Things that could affect millions of lives. And if certain people know we spoke, it could put both of us in danger." Before he could respond, her phone buzzed sharply. She glanced at the screen, her face tightening. "I have to go," she said quickly, gathering her things. "Elena." Wait, but she was already walking toward the door. Sundar watched her leave, the sense of unease in his chest growing heavier. He didn't know if she was running from someone, hiding from something, or both. But he did know one thing. Whatever storm she was in, it wasn't over. As he stepped out into the hallway, his phone buzzed again. This time it was an anonymous text. "No name, no number. Stay away from her if you value your life." And just as Sundar read the words, a shadow moved in the reflection of the glass wall beside him. Someone was watching. Asterisk, the words on the anonymous message burned into Sundar's mind like a warning carved into stone. "Stay away from her if you value your life." He stared at it for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the screen, as if he might reply. But there was no number to respond to, only the faceless void of an untraceable sender. He slipped the phone into his pocket and glanced around the hallway. The shadow he'd seen in the reflection was gone, but the air felt heavier now, as if someone invisible was still lingering, watching. Sundar had been in tense negotiations before, had navigated situations where billions of dollars and powerful egos clashed. But this felt different. This wasn't about money or contracts. This felt like stepping into a game where the rules were written by people who didn't care about consequences. He tried to shake it off, returning to his office, but his mind kept circling back to Elena. Her sharp gray eyes, the tremor in her voice when she told him to forget they had met, the way she seemed both strong and deeply cornered. There was a story there, a dangerous one, and Sundar knew from experience that ignoring things like this didn't make them go away. That night, long after the office had emptied, he sat alone at his desk with only the glow of his computer screen for company. He began searching quietly, starting with public information on Dr. Elena Vargas. Official biographies painted her as a medical visionary, the youngest CEO in the history of the World Health Organization, known for fearless reforms and refusing to bow to political pressure. But the deeper he dug into old interviews, reports, and obscure health policy debates, the more he found signs of conflict. 6 months ago, she had pushed for a controversial Global Health Data Transparency Act, which would require pharmaceutical companies to share all research data on life-saving drugs. It was a move that could save millions of lives, but would cost certain corporations billions. Soon after, articles began appearing criticizing her leadership, questioning her decisions, hinting at internal mismanagement. The pattern was too familiar. Sundar had seen it before. Smear campaigns designed to weaken someone before removing them entirely. Then he found something stranger. Buried in a small European news outlet was a report about a mysterious funding freeze at a WHO initiative led by Elena. The article mentioned intense external pressure, but didn't name the source. The next day, the article vanished from the site, replaced with a generic page not found. Sundar managed to pull up an archived copy, but that was it. No follow-ups, no official statements. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just corporate rivalry. This was deliberate. And the men from the bus stop, perhaps they were connected to whoever was trying to break her. His phone buzzed again. For a split second, he thought it might be another warning. But this time, it was a different number. The message was short. Meet me tomorrow. No security. No phone. 7 a.m. Baker Street Cafe. There was no name, but Sundar had a feeling who it might be. The next morning, the sun was barely up when he walked into the small cafe tucked between two quiet shops. It smelled of fresh bread and strong coffee. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of students huddled over laptops in the corner. At the far table, Elena sat alone, wearing a simple sweater and jeans. No security detail, no entourage. She looked like someone who had been awake all night. "Thank you for coming," she said as he sat down. Her voice was softer today, almost weary. "You didn't leave me much choice," Sundar replied. "After last night." And the text I got, her eyes darkened. "You got a warning? Anonymous. Told me to stay away from you." She looked down, shaking her head slightly. "I told you this could be dangerous. I wasn't exaggerating." "Then explain it to me," Sundar said, leaning forward. "What's going on?" For a long moment, she didn't speak. The clink of cups behind the counter and the low hum of the coffee machine filled the silence. Finally, she said, "Someone doesn't want me to finish what I started. I've been working on a program to distribute a new vaccine cheaply, globally, without the usual corporate price barriers. It would save millions, but it would also destroy a multi-billion-dollar market for certain companies. They've tried everything to stop me. Political pressure, cutting funding, media attacks. Now it's becoming personal." "Those men at the bus stop?" Sundar asked. She nodded. "Former partners in a health tech venture. I shut down one of their deals when I discovered they were inflating prices on critical medicines in developing countries. They haven't forgiven me, and now they've aligned themselves with bigger players who want me gone." Sundar absorbed her words carefully. "And last night, why were you alone, without protection?" "Because someone in my own circle is leaking my movements. The only way to be sure I'm not being tracked is to move quietly, without my usual team." She glanced around the cafe. "Even meeting you here is a risk." He looked at her steadily. "Then why call me at all?" She hesitated, then said, "Because you have something they don't: reach, influence, and the ability to move fast. I can't trust many people right now." "But last night, you didn't know who I was, yet you still helped me. That told me more about your character than any introduction ever could." Before Sundar could respond, the door of the cafe opened. 2 men in dark coats walked in, scanning the room. Their eyes swept past the students, past the counter, then landed on Elena. Her expression shifted instantly from cautious to alert. "We have to go," she whispered, standing quickly. "Who are they?" Sundar asked, rising with her. "Not the kind of people you want to be in a room with," she said tightly. As they moved toward the back exit, the men followed, their pace quickening. Sundar felt his pulse pick up, every step toward the narrow back hallway echoing louder in his ears. They pushed through the kitchen door just as one of the men called out sharply, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. When they reached the alley behind the cafe, Elena stopped abruptly. In the gray morning light, there was a black car, waiting engine running, back door open. "Get in," she said. "Whose car is this?" Sundar asked, glancing at her warily. "Someone who owes me a favor," she replied. But just as Sundar moved to step inside, a voice from behind him shouted, "Stop right there." He turned and saw the same tall man from the bus stop striding toward them, flanked by the other 2 men. Asterisk, the sound of the man's voice seemed to freeze the air in the narrow alley. It wasn't just loud, it carried a dangerous confidence, the kind that comes from someone used to being obeyed. Sundar's eyes locked on the tall man from the bus stop. the same cruel smirk now stretched across his face. Only this time, there was no drunken swagger in his steps. His movements were calculated, his gaze sharp, his presence commanding dot behind him. The two other men fanned out slightly, blocking the alley's entrance. They weren't here to talk, they were here to control the situation. The black car's engine hummed beside Sundar, its open door now feeling less like an escape and more like a trap. Elena's posture stiffened, her shoulders squaring as if bracing herself for a blow she'd been expecting for days. "Dr. Vargas," the tall man said with mock politeness. "What a surprise to find you here, hiding in plain sight." His eyes flicked to Sundar, scanning him with a slow, deliberate curiosity. "And you brought a friend. How thoughtful." "Leave him out of this," Elena said, sharply. "He has nothing to do with you." The man chuckled, stepping closer. "Oh, I think he has everything to do with me now. Especially since he's been seen with you twice." Sundar's mind raced. There was an unspoken weight in the man's words, a threat that wasn't just about physical harm. It was about association, reputation, leverage. This wasn't random intimidation. This was calculated pressure. "If you have something to say," Sundar replied calmly, "say it. Otherwise, we'll be leaving." The man tilted his head, his smirk widening. "You don't understand, do you? She's not who you think she is. She's been making dangerous moves, the kind that ruin lives. And you're standing next to her like some noble savior. I wonder how long you'll keep that up once you know the full story." "I know enough," Sundar said evenly. "Enough to see you trying to scare her into stopping whatever she's doing. Which means she's probably doing something worth protecting." The man's smile faded slightly, replaced by a cold stare. "You think this is a game? People disappear over less than this." Before Sundar could respond, Elena stepped between them. Her voice was steady, but her fingers curled tightly into fists. "You've already taken enough from me. I'm not backing down." The man's eyes hardened. "Then you've made your choice." He gave a subtle nod to the men flanking the alley entrance. They began to move forward, slow and deliberate, closing the gap inch by inch. Elena glanced at Sundar, her voice low but urgent. "We can't let them corner us." She took a step toward the car, but before they could reach it, one of the men shifted, blocking the way. The alley felt smaller now, the walls closing in. Sundar's pulse pounded in his ears, but his mind stayed clear. He'd been in enough high-pressure moments to know panic only made things worse. He subtly adjusted his position so he's slightly in front of Elena, creating a barrier between her and the advancing men. "What do you want?" Sundar asked the tall man. "Simple," he replied. "She stops her little campaign. She walks away from this vaccine nonsense, and she disappears quietly. Or the next time we meet, it won't be a conversation." Elena's jaw tightened. "You'll have to kill me before I give you what you want." The man smiled faintly, as if amused by her defiance. "Don't tempt me." In that moment, the tension snapped like a wire. One of the men lunged forward, reaching for Elena's arm. Instinct took over. Sundar stepped in, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it just enough to make him stumble back. The move wasn't flashy, but it was precise, controlled. The man hissed in pain, glaring at Sundar with surprise. "Careful," the tall man said coldly. "You don't want to make enemies you can't see coming." The sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the alley fast, heavy, deliberate. All heads turned as a new figure appeared. It was a woman dressed in a dark trench coat, her face partially shadowed by the morning light. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone used to taking charge in tense situations. "That's enough," she said, her voice low but carrying authority. The tall man's smirk faltered for the first time. "You shouldn't be here." "And yet I am," she replied. "Walk away, all of you, now." For a moment, it looked like the men might ignore her. Then, with a curt gesture, the tall man signaled to his companions. They backed away slowly, their eyes still locked on Sundar and Elena. Before disappearing into the street beyond the alley, the woman in the trench coat approached, her gaze flicking between them, Get in the car, she said to Elena. Both of you. Who are you? Sundar asked. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. Someone who's been trying to keep her alive. The three of them slid into the car, the driver pulling away without a word. The city streets blurred past the windows. But Sundar's mind was fixed on one thought, whoever this new woman was. She clearly knew more than either of them had revealed. After a few minutes of silence, the woman finally spoke. You don't understand the scope of this. It's not just about a vaccine. It's about control. And if you stay involved, Mr. Pichai, you have to choose sides. The car turned sharply, heading away from the main road. Sundar glanced out the window and realized they were leaving the city entirely. Where are we going? He asked Datta. The woman's eyes met his in the rearview mirror to show you what they're willing to do to win. Asterisk, the city's skyline faded behind them, replaced by stretches of empty highway flanked by dense trees. The hum of the engine was steady, but the air inside the car was thick with unspoken tension. Sundar sat beside Elena in the back seat, watching her profile in the dim morning light. She hadn't said a word since they left the alley. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. As if holding herself together required every ounce of control. She had left. The woman in the trench coat sat in the passenger seat, speaking in low tones to the driver in a language Sundar couldn't place. Every so often, she glanced back at them, her expression unreadable. Sundar had been in countless high-stakes negotiations, but this was different. This wasn't about business strategy or market competition. There was an edge here, a dangerous undercurrent that felt almost like walking into a storm. You could neither see nor avoid Dot after nearly 40 minutes. The car slowed, turning onto a narrow, unmarked road that wound deeper into the woods. The branches above intertwined, filtering the sunlight into fractured patterns that flickered across the windshield. They eventually stopped in front of a gated compound. Two men in plain clothes stood guard, each holding a tablet that scanned. The vehicle, before allowing it to pass Dot inside the compound, the world shifted. It wasn't a government facility, but it had the precision of one. Low, concrete buildings with minimal windows sat in neat rows, connected by narrow paths. A large satellite dish turned slowly toward the sky. The place smelled faintly of antiseptic, and Cold Metal Dot, the woman in the trench coat, got out first. Come with me, she said. Her voice left no room for hesitation. Sundar and Elena followed her through a side entrance into a long hallway. The walls were lined with locked doors, each marked with codes instead of names. Their footsteps echoed against the polished floor until the woman stopped at one particular door. Swiping a card to open it, Dot inside, the room was dimly lit, filled with screens displaying streams of data, video feeds, and news reports from around the world. Maps were pinned on one wall, marked with red circles and multiple countries. In the center stood a table with several files stacked neatly, alongside photographs. What is this place? Sundar asked, his voice low. Off the books, the woman replied. A secure operations hub. We track threats to global health initiatives, especially when they cross into political sabotage or corporate interference. She gestured toward the photographs. Sundar stepped closer and felt his chest tighten. The first image showed a crowded hospital ward and a rural village patients lying on thin mats, oxygen tanks lined against the wall. The next photo was darker, crates of vaccines labeled for delivery, but stamped with shipment blocked in bold. Red letters. Elena moved to the table, her eyes scanning the files. These are the countries in the first wave, she said, her voice quiet but heavy. If the shipments are delayed or blocked, thousands will die. The woman nodded grimly. And the people behind it aren't just in one place. They've infiltrated different governments, partnered with pharmaceutical lobbies, and even hired private security contractors to make sure your plan never reaches implementation. She looked directly at Sundar. The men you saw at the bus stop, they're part of one of those contractors. But they're just the surface layer. The real decision makers never get their hands dirty. Sundar's mind raced. It was one thing to read about corruption and obstruction in reports, It was another to stand in a room where the scale of it was laid out in front of you like a battle map. The red circles on the map weren't just points of interest, they were lives hanging in the balance. Why show me this? He asked finally, because the woman said, you're already in this, whether you realize it or not. They saw you with her. They've marked you as an ally. You have two choices: walk away now and hope they lose interest, or use your position to help us push this through before they destroy it completely. Sundar looked at Elena. Her eyes met his, a mix of determination and quiet desperation. I didn't want to involve you, she said, but the truth is, with your reach, your resources, you could turn this fight in our favor. We could bypass traditional supply chains, use your network to distribute the vaccine directly. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the map, studying the red circles one by one. Each represented a crisis waiting to happen or already happening. He thought of the faces in the hospital photo, the crates of vaccines blocked from reaching those who needed them most. He thought of the cold wind at the bus stop, the weight of his jacket on Elena's shoulders, the look in her eyes when she said someone in her own circle was betraying her. Finally, he turned back to them. If we do this, we can't just play defense. We'll have to go on the offensive, find out exactly who's behind this, and cut them off at the source. The woman in the trench coat's expression softened slightly. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Before they could speak further, one of the screens on the wall flashed red. A live feed popped up grainy security footage of a hallway. Men in dark coats and masks were moving quickly through it, armed. The driver's voice came through an intercom. We've got company, and they're not here to talk. An alarm began to blare, low at first, then louder, echoing through the compound. Elena turned to Sundar, her voice sharp. We have to secure the files before they get here. If they take this data, everything we've done is over. The woman in the trench coat pulled a small pistol from inside her coat and handed a flash drive to Sundar. Get to the back exit. There's a safe house 2 miles north. Don't stop for anything. The screens flickered again, showing the armed men closing in. Go. She ordered. And as Sundar grabbed Elena's arm and they ran down the hallway, the sound of boots pounding against the floor grew louder, closing the distance between them. The hallway felt like it was shrinking around them, each step echoing louder as the sound of boots pounded closer. Sundar could feel Elena's grip tighten on his arm as they ran, the weight of the flash drive in his pocket pressing against his leg like a reminder of what was at stake. The fluorescent lights above flickered, giving the corridor a strobe light effect that made it harder to tell just how close the men behind them were. Left, Elena shouted, pointing toward a narrower side passage. Sundar turned sharply, the soles of his shoes skidding on the polished floor. They burst through a metal door into a dim storage room stacked with sealed crates. The scent of disinfectant, mixed with the faint smell of cardboard and machine oil. We can't outrun them if we stay inside, Elena said, her voice low but urgent. The back exit is past the loading bay. Once we're outside, we head for the tree line. A muffled thud came from the other side of the door they just entered. Sundar's heart rate spiked. Someone was trying to force it open. Without thinking, he grabbed a nearby steel bar and wedged it under the door handle. It wouldn't hold for long, but it might buy them seconds. They weaved through the rows of crates, the loading bay's faint daylight ahead pulling them forward. Elena reached for the keypad beside the bay door, but before she could punch in the code, a sharp crack split the air. A bullet embedded itself in the metal frame inches from her hand. Down, Sundar shouted, pulling her behind a stack of crates. The gunfire grew louder, short, controlled bursts. These weren't amateurs. Elena's eyes were wide, but her breathing was steady. They can't get this drive, she said, pressing her hand against his pocket. Without it, every shipment will be blocked. Every country on that map will pay the price. Sundar nodded, his mind already calculating. There was no way they could both sprint to the tree line without being seen. But if one of them drew attention, away from the other. Listen to me, he said, looking directly at her. You take the drive and run for the safe house. I'll create a distraction. She shook her head instantly. No, if they catch you, if they catch either of us, this is over. But if you get out, you can still win. His voice was firm, but not unkind. This isn't about me. It's about the people who'll never know our names, but will live because of what you're doing. For a moment, she looked like she might argue again, but then she nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. You didn't have to help me that night at the bus stop, she said quietly. But you did. And you've been helping ever since. He managed a faint smile. Go, I'll find you. Without giving her time to hesitate, he grabbed an empty crate and shoved it hard across the floor, sending it crashing into the open space near the bay door. The noise drew the attacker's attention. Instantly shouts echoed as footsteps pounded toward him. Sundar ducked and weaved between stacks of supplies, making himself visible just long enough to keep their focus. He heard the bay door creak open, then slam shut. Elena was gone. Good dot, the men closed in, their boots heavy against the concrete. Sundar darted toward another exit, narrowly avoiding a burst of gunfire that shattered a fluorescent light above him. Shards rained down, stinging his skin. Adrenaline surged through him, each movement sharper. Faster dot and then silence. He stopped, pressing himself against the wall. The air was thick with tension. Dot, a voice cut through the quiet. Enough running, Nor, Pichai. It was the tall man from the bus stop, stepping into view with a pistol in hand. His smirk was back, but now it carried the satisfaction of a hunter cornering his prey. You think you've done something noble, the man said, circling slowly. But you've just made yourself a liability. People like you don't last long when you step into other people's wars. Sundar's breathing was steady, despite the pounding in his chest. Funny, he replied. People have been telling me that since I started working on ideas no one believed in. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now. The man's smirk faltered, just slightly. Before he could react, a sharp command rang out from behind him. Drop it. The woman in the trench coat stood at the far end of the aisle, her own weapon raised. Two guards from the compound flanked her, their rifles trained on the tall man. His eyes darted between them, calculating. Before he slowly lowered his pistol. This isn't over, he muttered. But the fight was gone from his voice. It's over for today. The woman said flatly. Dot, within minutes, the attackers were disarmed and escorted out under heavy guard. Sundar exhaled deeply, the adrenaline slowly ebbing. Dot, later, at the safe house, he found Elena sitting at a small wooden table, the flash drive on the surface between them. She looked up as he entered, relief flooding her features. You made it. He nodded, sinking into the chair opposite her. What's next? We release the data, she said. We bypass every blockade, and once it's out, they can't stop it. And they did. Over the next week, with Sundar's network and Elena's inside knowledge, the vaccine shipments began moving. Media outlets picked up the story, pressure mounted, and those blocking the program were forced to back down. 2 weeks later. On a quiet evening, Sundar walked past the same bus stop where it had all begun. The cold wind was back, carrying with it the memory of that night, of a woman shivering alone, of a choice made without knowing where it would lead. He paused, pulling his own jacket tighter. And for a moment, he thought about how small acts could set in motion something far bigger than anyone imagined. Sometimes, he realized, you don't choose the fight. The fight chooses you.